Right guys, Haunted May 13 here, back with another prediction video, this time for UFC Fight Night. Sandhagen versus Figueiredo. It's a good card, a lot of good fights, a lot of close ones that are hard to predict. I'm going to give my prediction and breakdown for the 5 fights on the main card. Starting with fight number 1, Jeremy Stephens versus Mason Jones. Jeremy Stephens, obviously a legend in the UFC, went out, did his own thing for the last few years. He was in boxing. He actually faced Jose Aldo there. He got a draw, which is impressive because Aldo's obviously a really good striker. But he's facing a guy in Mason Jones who's been on Cage Warriors before the UFC. He then went to the UFC, had a bit of a hit and miss run, but faced good people. Ludwig Klam was actually his last fight. And he had some close fights with them people. Mike Davis, even, he faced him and he had a good fight with him. So it was actually a fight of the night, I believe, that fight. So he's a great fighter, Mason Jones. He was a Cage Warriors champion when he came to the UFC, and he's since then gone up a weight and won another title in Cage Warriors. He's the first ever 2-time double Cage Warriors champion, and he's facing Jeremy Stephens here, who's really, really powerful. But his grappling's what worries me, because he's been out of MMA for a long time and he's done strictly striking related activity since then. He did boxing and then he went on to do BKFC, bare knuckle boxing. His boxing career, he fought on the Jake Paul card as well, so he's obviously earned a lot of money doing that. And he's an older fighter. Is his motivation going to be there, or is this one last cash grab? I think Mason Jones should get this one done. I think he's the more polished fighter. He's got the better all-round game. He's fought top-level prime UFC fighters before, like Mike Davis and Ludwig Klan, and had competitive fights in certain rounds. So I can't see Jeremy Stephens having the fairy tale comeback. I think he's going to get beaten comfortably. I think he's going to get finished, and I think it's going to come in the late second / early third round, and it's going to come during a position where Mason Jones gets good top position, gets control, starts to flatten him out and just starts hammering ground and pound, and I can just see him just relentlessly hammering down on him until the referee jumps in, because Jeremy Stephens is known for being very tough. I think the one chance Stephens has is landing that shot, but I think Mason Jones is going to be aware and use his grappling and distance management and stay out of trouble and get the finish late. So that's what I think is going to happen in that one. Mason Jones is going to get a win in his first fight back and a well-deserved contract with the UFC, because he's a top prospect and he's only 30. Moving on, fight number 2 on the main card, Cameron Smotherman versus Sergey Siddy. Now, Sergey Siddy, you'll remember him from his fight against, his 2 fights actually against Tavares, but one of those fights was actually stopped early and Siddy was a bit unlucky there. And then in the rematch, they ended up having a fight of the night, which was actually a contender for fight of the year early on the year, because it was in January, I believe, that fight last year. And he got beat in that one as well, but he was also, again, unlucky in my opinion, because I thought it was a robbery. And that was the card where not every Canadian lost, and Siddy, even though he's Ukrainian, is Canadian as well, because he trains out of there. So I think there was a robbery there. But the difference in this fight is Smotherman fought Jake Hadley in his debut and showed really, really good composure for a fighter as young as that. And since then, Hadley's got a win in PFL, but it's PFL, so that doesn't tell you a lot. But Hadley has had wins over Caelan Loughran, who we've recently seen beat a top prospect in Nathan Fletcher. And he's also had, just all-round good performances, Jake Hadley, in the past, like his Malcolm Gordon fight a while ago, even though Gordon's a bum. But I think that Siddy is more of a scrapper, whereas Smotherman's more of a technical guy who likes to use his cleaner striking and doesn't like to get into a bloodbath brawl, whereas Siddy seems like the kind of guy in his previous fights who likes that and thrives in that. Smotherman just seems to me like the all-round more skilled guy, and they're both pretty similar as far as what they like to do. They like to stay on the feet, but Smotherman does mix in takedowns when needed, as he did in his Contender Series and his debut against Hadley. He showed good defence against BJJ in that fight as well, because Hadley's really good off his back with throwing up triangles. He did actually have a triangle in the UFC. So Smotherman's really got a lot of wise beyond his years to him. You know, he's very, very smart when he's in those positions, and he doesn't just sacrifice and make silly mistakes there and get turned or get swept, which is something that Siddy would have to do to get back to his feet, obviously, because he's not got the elite BJJ to do what Hadley was doing, and that still wasn't enough in that fight. So I think Smotherman should get this done pretty easily. I don't think this one's going to be a finish. I think it's going to be more of like a just piecing up, more of like a masterclass kind of performance. Maybe not quite a masterclass, but more of like just a clean, good work and a more pretty performance, for want of a better word, where he's just going to stay on the outside and stay out of trouble and make Siddy look a level below skill-wise. I think it's going to be a decision for Smotherman. Another win in the UFC. I think he's only 24 years of age, really bright future ahead of him, and he's got a well-rounded game like Mason Jones, who I just talked about, and they're the ones I've got to pick here. You can go for power and you can go for scrappiness in certain fights, but when you're facing well-rounded guys in the prime, you've got to pick the more skilled guy. So everyone in this, both competitors are young, so they're both going to be ready and willing. It's just who's got the more well-rounded skill set, and that is Cameron Smotherman. So unlike the last fight, two young guys, and I think the better fighter is going to win this one. I don't think it's going to come down to grit, because I think Smotherman's got enough of that, and he showed it in the Hadley fight, because Hadley's a lot higher level than Sergey Siddy. So easy one to pick. Lock of the night, Smotherman to get the decision, and I'd definitely hammer on that in your parlay. Moving on, fight number 3 on the main card. The most stupid fight on this main card, in my opinion. Montel Jackson versus Daniel Marcos. The best way to describe Montel Jackson is like Michael Chandler off Timo. He's really not good. He's just athletic. He's really explosive. He comes out in the third round like that is the only round. Like that round is the be all and end all. Like if he don't get that finish, he's not gonna win. Basically, that's how he fights. But unlike someone like a Michel Pereira, he has actually got an okay gas tank. It's just that when he comes out and does that, he tends to fade and lose the explosiveness, similar to a Michael Chandler. That's why I compare him, because Chandler has a gas tank, but he just kind of loses that edge when he gets into the later rounds, power-wise. And unlike Chandler, he doesn't have grappling though. He doesn't have the wrestling pedigree, Jackson. So I just don't think he's got enough skills to win this fight. He's facing Daniel Marcos, as I've got here. You know, Marcos tends to eke out decisions, and that's the kind of fighter that can beat these explosive guys, because they can just wear them out and then start to come on late, especially in these 3-round fights. You know, it's very, very evident after a first round. You see these guys tend to take over in the second and third with no worries of having to go another 2 rounds after that. They tend to just use more energy in those next 2 rounds. I can see Marcos just out-dogging him in this fight, and like the last fight, I think this is going to be a decision, but I do think the first round is going to be very exciting. So this fight will have a bit of excitement, at least in that first round, because Jackson is explosive and powerful. Marcos has got a decent chin there, and he's never been out-dogged in a fight, so I don't think he's going to get fearful in that round and start to back off. I think he's going to take over in that second and third, knowing the danger has decreased. I think Marcos is going to eke out a decision. As I said, he's done that in a few fights, recent fights, split decisions, close unanimous decisions. I think this one's going to be a more comfortable unanimous decision, where he has a close first round, which possibly gets won by Jackson, but then the second 2 rounds are clear, no arguments, but a Daniel Marcos victory, relatively comfortable, 29-28. Moving on to fight number 4. This is a long main card, 6 fights, because it's a crowded event. We like to see that. Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Rodriguez. Which one? Daniel. The reason I forget that is because I was talking about Yair in the recent prediction, so let me off, guys. Daniel Rodriguez and Sergey Ponzinibbio. This is like a perfect fight. I always feel like we have a meme fight every card. This is it. The 2 fighters that are the least consistent in the welterweight decision, possibly in the UFC. One day they look like a top-level, doggy, gritty fighter. Next fight, they get chinned in a round. It really is no in-between with these guys. For example, Daniel Rodriguez gets chinned in a round by Ian Gary with a head kick, which didn't look that powerful. I know it come out of kind of nowhere, but he just kind of wilted there straight away and just overwhelmed. Next fight comes out against Gastelum, has an amazing performance after Gastelum missed weight by a crazy amount, and you're thinking, oh, this guy's great. Is he going to revert to type and do what he seems to keep doing, where he has that bad performance and then next minute he looks like a top gritty guy who can hang in there? The next fight he can't last around. Same thing with Ponzinibbio. One fight looks like a killer. His last fight against Carlston Harris. But then before that, he's getting embarrassed by Kevin Holland, and Kevin Holland's asking, can you smell weed in here in the middle of the fight? Because he's so comfortable. That's the amount of threat he felt in that fight. So it's a really hot and cold kind of thing with both of these guys. The difference is, I think Ponzinibbio just has that more skillful striking ability, whereas Rodriguez is just that Mexican heritage, Mexican-American dog who just sometimes looks like he can take punches all night, but you can't always rely on him for that. So I'm picking the guy that's got the better skills in the striking, because this is going to be a stand-up fight. I think the height advantage and reach advantage, I think, is definitely on Ponzinibbio's side, although Rodriguez is a tall welterweight, but he's quite pudgy. He has T-Rex arms, a bit like Ian Gary. That's why Ian Gary was able to comfortably land shots, because Ian Gary has those T-Rex arms. It's one of those fights where I just think the guy with the reach advantage and the more silky smooth striking is just going to be able to get the upper hand. I think this is going to be a finish late for Ponzinibbio, because unlike in the last fight, Ponzinibbio has finishing potential. Not so much Rodriguez, and that's another factor having these type of fights. Who's the more likely to get the finish? Ponzinibbio is that guy coming off a finish against Carlston Harris, who is a bum but still impressive. To get a finish in the UFC, especially when you fight in the top 20, top 25 of a division. Harris has fought people like Shavkat, so he's not a bum. But as far as what I'm talking about here, top level, he is a bum. But we'll give him his respect. But as we saw, Ponzinibbio's finished people many times, and he's got the most third round finishes of any welterweight. That's my fact that I actually researched that to double check. So he likes to get the finish late, and I think he's going to do that here. I'm thinking Rodriguez is going to have one of his performances where he's a bit more durable, but he's not going to have enough in the tank, because Ponzinibbio is going to piece him up in those early rounds and get the finish late. I think it's going to come against the fence, hammering down on him, landing shots to the body. We know that he's soft to the body. He's one of those skinny fat Mexican builds, is Rodriguez. He'll get punched into the body and then he'll get folded with a left hand, probably. Holding my right hand up there. Left hand. He'll get folded with that and he'll crumble. And that's going to happen in the third round, probably the end of the third round, when he's getting pressured and cut off in the octagon, because someone who, like Ponzinibbio, can cut off the octagon very well, because he tends to use a lot of like range, and then he tends to kind of use distance management until he gets you down, weared out, and then he'll get you to the side of the cage, and that's when he's landed shots on people and took them out before. He's done it to people like Harris, and he'll do it here, I think. And I think he'll do it really, really systematically by piecing him up round after round, and then slowly closing that gap and putting the pressure on more and more. So my prediction is third round TKO for Sergey Ponzinibbio. Moving on to the co-main event finally. The legendary Bo Nickel, the king of charisma, the most charismatic guy in the UFC. Love watching that guy's interviews where he says about 2 words every answer. Versus Rene Derrida, RDR. Too many of these initials in UFC at the minute. DDP, you know what I mean? It's getting a bit too much. RDR, good fighter but sloppy, but he's gritty. Bo Nickel got surprisingly clean striking, doesn't overextend too much when he throws shots. His Paul Craig performance was very much a letdown, but he showed really, really patient, veteran-like striking, where he wasn't letting Paul Craig wind him up, because Paul Craig was in the middle of the octagon trying to rev him up, whereas you'd think it'd be the veteran would be able to get him out of his comfort zone, but it was almost the other way around, where Bo Nickel was the one acting like the veteran, staying calm and composed, not buying into Paul Craig's tricks. And I thought it was a really boring performance, but he did show that he's composed, and he did win that fight clearly. I know he got booed after that, and people don't really talk about that performance in good light, which I don't either. It was terrible. to watch. But Bernickel won that comfortably. Paul Craig has beat top guys, Ankalaev, the champion, for example, since then. But I think that Bernickel's gone a step too far here, I'm afraid. I think Rene de Ridder is just going to outgrit him in this. I think the striking early will kind of make Rene think twice about getting those takedowns, unlike the Kevin Holland fight. Someone like Kevin Holland tends to take a few more chances, go into a brawl like he did against Gunnar Nelson recently, but Rene de Ridder fighting someone like Bernickel is going to have to work harder for those entries, especially the fact that he's fighting the best wrestler possibly in the UFC on paper. Sorry, sound like Anthony Smith. Unlucky Anthony, by the way. Sorry about your bad luck in retiring, that was hilarious. Anyway, I think he's going to have a really hard time getting Burr down, so the way he's going to win this fight, in my opinion, is he's going to get him against the fence, wear on him, and it's actually going to be the punches and the elbows that are going to force Bernickel himself to shoot. I then think, with his superior BJJ, that Rene's going to swoop over to the back and he's going to take Bernickel's back. And I think from that point, Bernickel is going to panic. He's going to have been hit with elbows and punches, possibly bloody nose, struggling to breathe. And I think Rene de Ridder is going to get the shock submission. And I think this is going to come in the second round, after a round of Bernickel being cautious and people thinking like we're heading for another Paul Craig performance. And then RDR is going to step in and save the day. So Rene de Ridder, second round, sub, my underdog of the card, and then the biggest upset so far this year possibly as well. So that's my pick, and I'm very confident in that. Hammer that, because a lot of people are thinking Bernickel's just going to be the cleaner guy and the better wrestler. People aren't realising that the BJJ is going to be the factor in this fight, and the striking of Rene, even though it looks DDP-esque, we've seen that get people to the top. Paddy Pimblett, for example, recently. And I think it's going to be enough in this fight. And he's got a lot of experience outside the UFC that people aren't giving him enough credit for. Moving on, finally, to the main event of the evening. Corey the Sandman Sandhagen versus Davison Figueiredo. Figgy. Bit shit compared to Sandman. This fight is a banger. Amazing main event. Corey Sandhagen is a nerd. He spoke about that recently, how he might be a bit retarded, he's awkward. Can't deny that. I remember his interview a while ago before he fought Marlon Chito Vera. He was like talking about his depression, and he kind of put me on a downer at the time actually listening to him. He's quite a miserable guy, reads a lot of books, trains with a lot of kickboxers. In his camp for his fight against Umar, he was training in London actually, and I think he trained at London Shoot Fighters for that fight as well. I think he knows MVP, who has more of that kickbox karate style. Sandhagen looked like an absolute tard in that fight against Umar. He embarrassed himself, to be honest with you. He could have won that fight. This fight is a different thing altogether. He's fighting an absolute dog in Davison Figueiredo, who has easily the more speed out of the two guys. He's coming up a weight division. He looked amazing in that Yan fight. He may have lost that fight, but that was one of my favourite fights of last year. He looked absolutely locked in. The higher weight didn't look a problem to me. He didn't look like he was struggling taking any of the shots. He actually looked more powerful in a way, because the last time I've seen Figgy get knockdowns was actually his last fight at flyweight, when he fought. No, it was against Marlon Chito Vera. Sorry, his first fight at bantamweight. He was the first person. Here's a fact for you: the first person to ever knock down Marlon Vera, something Sean O'Malley could not do in 2 fights. So he's looked great at bantamweight. That backs up the point even more. And I think he's just really looking dangerous, man. He's faster than Sandhagen. Sandhagen's didn't look great at all in that Umar fight. And look how Figgy fought against Yan, even, who to me is a better fighter, at least all round, than a lot of the people that Sandhagen's fought recently. The only one who's more better rounded is probably Umar. But look at him in that fight. He couldn't do a thing. He just stood there posturing and demoting. It was weird. It's like Fortnite. But he's going to get beat here. Davison Figueiredo, I'm not sure he's the underdog. I think it's close to evens, but he's got this fight all day in my book. He's the better, faster, more crisp striker. The only thing I'll say, Sandhagen has got the more unorthodox style. He used to be a lot more unorthodox back in the day. He used to be similar to a Yair Rodriguez, but at bantamweight. But since then, he's got a bit more technical and boring and more safe and wrestling heavy. But we saw Peter Yan be successful with that, so I can see a lot of people saying if Sandhagen uses that tactic in this fight, he's going to win, because he could use the blueprint set by Peter Yan. The difference is Peter Yan's got that lower centre of gravity, and he's also got better scrambles than Sandhagen, because Figueiredo's got that lower flyweight scramble mentality. You know, the best scramblers in the UFC are the flyweights. That's my favourite thing about watching flyweight. He's not going to be kept down by someone like Corey Sandhagen. He just isn't slick enough to out-scramble a Figueiredo. I think he's going to lose this fight, and I think it's going to be a decision for Figgy. I think he's going to outstrike him, and he's going to get taken down, but get up and get in good positions against the fence. He's going to use off defensive grappling to get positions maybe against the fence, underhooks, and he's going to use them knees to the body he loves to throw. And I think he's just going to outstrike and outwit Corey Sandhagen, the nerd, who reads books instead of trains to actually win a fight. Thanks guys for watching. Looking forward to this card. Subscribe, and I'll be back with more videos soon. Thank you.